Before sunrise, the transport line was already moving, and the pressure was obvious. A C-17 Globemaster III, 174 feet long with a 169-foot 10-inch wingspan, was preparing to carry a jump force toward contested airspace, while mission planners weighed radar coverage, wind bands, drone activity, and the distance from safe recovery fields to the drop zone. The aircraft itself was built for exactly this kind of moment. The U.S. Air Force says the C-17 is designed to airdrop 102 paratroopers with their accompanying equipment, and that matters when every extra minute on the ground increases exposure, and every extra mile in the air increases the chance of interception. But the transport was not the only piece moving. As Washington pushed more forces and warships into the region, fighter cover became part of the same equation, because a slow, heavy airlifter carrying troops, weapons, and rucksacks is not just a transport platform in a crisis zone, it is a flying target, and once the escort package forms up, the mission changes from routine airlift to a combat entry problem measured in 2 aircraft, 102 paratroopers, 4 engines, 450 knots, and a runway margin that can shrink to 3,500 feet if the receiving field is damaged or austere. That is where the tension begins. The loadmasters are checking straps, the jump sequence is being finalized, and somewhere ahead, the route is being mapped against threat rings that can turn one clean approach into a disaster in less than 60 seconds. Do you think the greater danger comes first from air defenses above the corridor, or from what is waiting on the ground below? Inside the command center, the mission had already turned into a live combat calculation. Radar tracks, satellite imagery, weather bands, and aircraft positions were being layered into one moving picture, because a C-17 carrying a full jump load does not get to improvise once it enters a threatened corridor. The Air Force says the C-17 is built to airdrop 102 paratroopers with equipment, cruises at about 450 knots, and can still operate from runways as short as 3,500 feet, which is why every route change, altitude block, and timing adjustment matters before the aircraft reaches the release area. The escort package had to move faster than the transport problem it was protecting. Boeing lists the A-18E F Super Hornet with a top speed of Mach 1.6, a ceiling above 50,000 feet, and a maximum takeoff weight of 66,000 pounds, giving a 2-jet section enough speed and altitude margin to sweep ahead, react to pop-up tracks, and close gaps before a heavy airlifter becomes exposed. In practical terms, the fighters were not there for show. They were there to buy seconds, and in contested airspace, 30 to 60 seconds can decide whether a transport run stays orderly or starts breaking apart. That wider pressure was already visible across the region. AP reported that the United States had sent additional Marines and warships into the Middle East as the conflict widened, which means a transport and escort mission like this would be flying inside a theater already crowded with surveillance aircraft, missile defenses, strike packages, and emergency response assets. The command post could see that larger picture in real time, but the crews in the air still had to fly through it, one heading, one fuel chibig, and one threat ring at a time. The C-17 is designed to airdrop 102 paratroopers with their accompanying equipment, the U.S. Air Force states. And that single line explains why the aircraft becomes so important once the route turns dangerous. A platform carrying that much manpower and gear is not just another radar return. It becomes the center of the mission and everything around it. From fighter cover to timing windows to command center decisions starts revolving around keeping that one aircraft alive long enough to reach the drop zone. Inside the C-17, the mood changed as the aircraft neared the release corridor. Troops stopped talking, checked static lines, tightened straps, and shifted combat loads that can easily pass 100 pounds once parachute gear, rifle, ammunition, water, and mission equipment are combined. The Air Force says the C-17 can airdrop 102 paratroopers, so once that sequence begins, every second inside the cargo bay has to stay controlled. Outside, the Escort carried the faster burden. Boeing says the A-18E F Super Hornet can reach Mach 1.6 and operate above 50,000 feet, giving the fighter pair enough margin to move ahead, check for threats, and protect the slower aircraft carrying the actual landing force. One platform was built to fight. The other had to survive long enough to deliver men to the ground. That difference is what made the mission tense. The C-17 is designed to airdrop 102 paratroopers with their accompanying equipment, the Air Force states, and that turns one transport run into a high-value target package the moment the route enters contested airspace. As the aircraft approached the drop corridor, the procedure became brutally simple and extremely unforgiving. Static lines had to be checked, spacing had to hold, and the jump sequence had to stay clean inside a transport, moving at about 450 knots, because once the release run starts, hesitation is not just a delay. It is a disruption that can ripple through 102 paratroopers, their equipment, and the entire landing plan. The physical burden was heavy before anyone even reached the door. Army Airborne guidance shows how static line operations are built around strict exit procedures, while Army reporting on jump loads describes paratroopers carrying more than 80 pounds of equipment strapped to the body and a parachute system weighing more than 50 pounds. That kind of load changes everything from balance to speed to how fast men can regroup after landing. Outside the transport, the Escort had to keep the corridor clear for exactly those few vulnerable minutes. The Navy describes the A-18E as an all-weather, twin-engine, mid-wing, multi-mission, carrier-suitable tactical aircraft, and in fighter mode, it is used primarily for escort and fleet air defense. That meant the jump run depended on two very different forms of discipline at once, one inside the cargo bay and one in the sky ahead. Then came the last clean seconds before release. The jump master checked the line, the door opened, and the men nearest the exit had to stay steady under loads that Army data has long associated with total jump weights approaching 400 pounds once the soldier, parachute system, and combat equipment are combined. At that point, the difference between an orderly exit and a broken sequence can come down to spacing measured in seconds and airspeed held close to the planned profile. The transport could not fight its way through that moment on its own. The Navy says the F/A-18 inches fighter mode is used primarily as a fighter escort and for fleet air defense. So the escort pair was there to keep the corridor clear, while the C-17, built to airdrop 102 paratroopers, stayed locked on the run to the drop zone. One aircraft was opening the door, the other was making sure the door could stay open long enough for the mission to work. What happened after the drop mattered just as much as the jump itself. Once the first men hit the ground, the problem changed from surviving the air corridor to building combat order fast enough to avoid being caught scattered, because 102 paratroopers landing with heavy gear can create a usable force only if they regroup, recover equipment bundles, and push outward before enemy surveillance or indirect fire starts finding the landing area. The Air Force notes that the C-17 is built to deliver exactly that size of airborne package, which is why the drop zone is never the finish line. It is the start of the ground fight. That is also where the escort mission starts paying off in real terms. Navair describes the F/A-18E, F Super Hornet, as a high-performance, twin-engine, multi-mission tactical aircraft, and that flexibility matters, because fighters covering an insertion window can shift from pure escort to overwatch, deterrence, and rapid response, while troops below are still sorting themselves into a fighting formation. The aircraft above buy time. The troops below have to turn that time into control of terrain. The wider theater makes that ground clock even harsher. AP reported that the United States had already moved thousands more troops and additional warships into the Middle East, so any airborne insertion would be unfolding inside a much larger campaign where speed, access, and staying power all matter at once. If the landing force can secure space quickly, the air bridge stays useful. If it cannot, the next transport wave becomes much harder to risk. Once the first wave hit the ground, the mission changed immediately. A drop of 102 paratroopers can look powerful from the air, but on the ground, it only becomes combat power if men regroup fast, recover equipment, and push outward before the landing area turns into a target. The U.S. Air Force states, the C-17 is designed to airdrop 102 paratroopers with their accompanying equipment, and that makes the first minutes after landing just as important as the flight itself. The physical burden on that force is heavier than it looks. Army material on airborne systems notes that total jump weight can reach 400 pounds, with the parachute system itself around 40 pounds before adding rucks, weapons, ammunition, food, and water. That kind of load slows assembly, stretches spacing, and raises the risk that a force will land together but fight separately if the regrouping drill is not fast enough. Air cover matters even after the drop is complete. The U.S. Navy says the A-18E F is an all-weather, twin-engine, mid-wing, multi-mission, carrier-suitable tactical aircraft. And Navair describes it as a high-performance, twin-engine, mid-wing, and multi-mission tactical aircraft. That means the Escort is not only protecting the transport on entry, it can also hold overwatch while the landing force turns from scattered jumpers into an organized ground unit. The real test came after the first landing force was on the ground. One successful drop proves access for a moment, but a sustained operation depends on whether the air bridge can keep moving troops, ammunition, medical gear, and follow-on loads into the same threatened space without losing tempo. Air Mobility Command states, the C-17 is capable of rapid strategic delivery of troops and all types of cargo to main operating bases or directly to forward bases in the deployment area. And that line matters because the aircraft is carrying more than men. It can move up to 170,900 pounds, reach a maximum gross weight of 585,000 pounds, and still operate on runways as short as 3,500 feet and only 90 feet wide, which turns a narrow strip of usable ground into a possible entry point for the next wave. That is where escort and sustainment start merging into one problem. The Navy says the A-18E. F is used primarily as a fighter escort and for fleet air defense, but in a follow-on phase its value also comes from keeping pressure off the corridor while heavier aircraft keep arriving with fuel bladders, communications gear, and additional combat loads. Army airborne data has long tracked jump weights up to 400 pounds, and a recent Army demonstration in February 2026 showed an advanced delivery system carrying a 535-pound suspended payload from 4,750 feet, which helps explain why the landing zone has to be secured quickly if the air bridge is going to scale instead of stall. By this point, the mission was no longer just about one aircraft and one drop. It was a test of whether the United States could keep a combat air bridge alive under pressure using a transport that can carry 102 paratroopers or 170,900 pounds of cargo and fighters built to hold escort, air defense, and rapid response at the same time. Air Mobility Command states, the C-17 is capable of rapid strategic delivery of troops and all types of cargo to main operating bases or directly to forward bases, which is why one successful insertion immediately raises the question of how. Many more can follow. That larger system depends on protection, not just lift. The US Navy states, in its fighter mode, the F/A-18 is used primarily as a fighter escort and for fleet air defense, while Navair describes the F/A-18E F as a high-performance, twin-engine, mid-wing, and multi-mission tactical aircraft. Put together, that means the air bridge only works if the transport capacity, the escort envelope, and the landing force on the ground keep moving as one chain instead of three separate pieces. Here is what this mission finally comes down to. A C-17 is not a stealth platform, not a strike fighter, and not a symbol built for television. It is a four-engine airlifter built to move mass. And the U.S. Air Force says that mass can mean 102 paratroopers, 134 troops with sidewall seats, or as much as 170,900 pounds of cargo when the mission demands raw lift instead of speed alone. The ground side is just as unforgiving. Army airborne data has long shown that total jump weight can reach 400 pounds once the parachute system, soldier, weapon, ammunition, and combat equipment are combined, and that means the landing force does not hit the earth as a clean parade formation. It lands heavy, vulnerable, and exposed, which is why regrouping speed, equipment recovery, and immediate perimeter control become the difference between a successful entry and a force that arrives in pieces. So the real story was never just the jump. It was the chain behind the jump, command center tracking, fighter escort, transport timing, disciplined exit, and the first violent minutes after landing, when scattered men have to become an organized fighting unit. Air Mobility Command states, the C-17 is capable of rapid strategic delivery of troops and all types of cargo to main operating bases or directly to forward bases. And that is the larger message here. If that bridge stays open, pressure can keep building. If it breaks, the entire plan slows at once.